what do I do at the University of Northampton? I'm the module coordinator for our third year module in parapsychology that was developed by Professor Chris Rowe. He's still there, but he's involved in a lot of independent research at the moment. I'm caretaking parapsychology, but I teach on positive psychology, I teach death, dying and bereavement, I teach about human sexual behaviour, everything from the evolution of sexual behaviour through to fetishes and things like that, and all kinds of studies that have been done. I seem to have a fascinating career at the university and quite a lot of variation and leeway to teach what I want to teach. But I gained the Alex Tanous Scholarship in 2011, and it was just a small bid to talk about what I was researching, and what you got was $500 just to help you with books or some local travel and things like that. And I have to admit that when I signed up for it and I'd submitted my application to get some funding and support, I'd not heard of Alex Tanous, but I saw his book Beyond Coincidence a few times. So I went and Googled it, I went and bought it on Amazon and read into it, and then discovered I'd been awarded it, and they sent me over that book and several other pieces of material. And I just thought, this is really strange, especially in the UK. Alex Tanous had not really been heard about all that much. Some people had heard about him within UK parapsychology, but not a lot. And then I was surprised, the more I actually dug, I found he was quite a unique character because of the various things that he claimed, the academic status that he held. And I just thought, well, you know, if I can help out in any way, I will do, in terms of getting the Alex Tanous Foundation for Scientific Research acknowledged a bit more and getting some more awareness out there. And so I've become very, very close to the Alex Tanous family. They're the main people who run the board and give out grants and scholarships, and also try and work on all the archival stuff. They've got such a massive archive of his work. I've been steadily going through it and trying to build on it. So you've even seen books over there, Conversations with Ghosts. That was just a 3-chapter draft of a book that he was going to write and never actually did. And my name's on it because I went and found other things that he'd done and pieced it all together to at least finish off a book that presented some of his ideas. And then more recently, Psi in Psychotherapy as well, which has taken 3 years to mend, to edit, to really look at what he was getting at and get it out there as a book as well. But there's more to come. So I want to really just kind of enlighten you with who Alex Tanous was and what he did and what his place in research was like. This is a screenshot of him lecturing at the University of Southern Maine. He claimed that he was one of the first people, even though there were various classes at different universities that were on parapsychology, it's still, even to this day, not seen very much as a serious topic within American educational circles. You know, if you've got clinical psychology and chemistry and physics, it's up here, parapsychology is right down here, even if a university lets that kind of topic through the door. You have got some places, you've got Atlantic University, they teach parapsychology. Lloyd Auerbach is very much involved in that over there. What else do you have? You have the University of West Georgia. They've got one of my colleagues, Dr. Christine Simmons-Moore, from the UK. She's permanently based there as a parapsychologist and leading a lot of research. And there are a few other places as well that will spring to mind later. But as you've seen, the UK is flourishing with universities that are supporting this. Alex was based at the University of Southern Maine, which still acknowledges his place there, and he was teaching a taught course, more so of an evening class in parapsychology, but he claimed it was one of the very first ones to be offered with credit. So if you took it, it would contribute towards your overall degree classification and what you were getting. Took that class, you got your credit. And there were various things. He was talking about the background of parapsychology, its history, modern research, and then more so his own experiences. He was talking about psychic healing and getting people to critically evaluate real-world cases, seemingly, of psychic healing. He was talking a lot about dream interpretation, getting people to keep dream diaries and bring them along and discuss them. And so that developed into some of his books, but also into a really popular class. They had thousands of people on a waiting list wanting to either do it as part of their degree course or just take that standalone module and go to the University of Southern Maine and meet Alex Tanous, be taught by him and learn more about parapsychology. But still, quite an unknown figure. So let me give you a little bit of his... Oh, I turned it off again. There we go. His background. He did a lot of traveling. These are some pictures of him in Egypt. He'd taken study groups out there, sat in front of the Sphinx. They're really old photographs, so the clarity isn't that great, but there's the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids behind. He'd even allegedly remote viewed, so he had this vision that behind the Sphinx, at the very back of the Sphinx, was a hidden chamber underneath. There was a lot of people insisting that there was nothing underneath the Sphinx or in it, it's a solid structure. and he insisted that he had this very strong impression there was a chamber there and some archaeologists working on it. Did some digging around the back and realised they'd broken through into something. So there's some very beautiful pictures of Alex being the very first one on scene, being allowed to stick his head into the chamber first and take some photographs down there. So remarkable. We've got these instances of psychics and remote viewers being used in a number of instances of not only finding hidden locations like that. There's a brilliant book called The Blue Sense, which is about psychic detectives and crime by Marcello Truzzi and Arthur Loynes. All about the police over time using psychics for criminal and crime detection, all the way from the Jack the Ripper trials in Whitechapel, Jack the Ripper murder, nothing went to trial. Robert James Lees, he was the private personal psychic to Queen Victoria. He believed he'd tracked down one of the suspects believed to be Jack the Ripper at the time. Later on in World War II, there was sort of an SS occult division in the Nazi warfare of getting into parapsychology, but then also occult practices and incorporating it into warfare. In the UK, there was a remote viewing division, but it was just a small cottage in the countryside run by some lady that was just looking at psychic abilities and how they can be used for military purposes. Later on, you've got all this thing happening between America and Russia and using psychics to remote view. So with that stuff, look at Ed May and Lloyd Auerbach. They've been writing up a lot of this, the Stargate project particularly. So Alex was involved in that. Leaving this picture up because I know I've just mainly included pictures in this to kind of prompt a bit of storytelling and background. So Alex was, his background was Lebanese. He was born in Van Buren, Maine, but before he was even born, his father was spending a lot of time working in New York City. He was good friends with Khalil Gibran, the author of The Prophet. Quite a few nods of heads there. And Khalil Gibran came to him and said, "You will have a son, a man of many gifts, great gifts, but also a man of great sorrows." He was the eldest of nine brothers. And when he was born, there were a few things that suggested to them that he was slightly different and may have some special gifts about him. His parents also believed that they were psychically intuitive. They'd given mediumistic readings to people, so they were very open to this idea. Two things that happened during his birth. One was, three. They were contemplating calling him Alexander, and they believed that in the palm of one of his hands he'd got an upside-down A. I'm not so convinced by that because I think I've got that in my palms as well, and I'm not called Alex. But on one of his palms, they believed that he got the Star of David, which had been attributed to having this psychic potential. There are a few psychics through history that claimed that they got this Star of David in the palm print. But the other one was he was born with the veil. So the afterbirth, the embryotic sac, was draped over his head when he was born. And in some cultures, they believe this to be a sign of being psychically intuitive or that child having some gifts. So those were the first initial signs. When Alex was growing and he was starting to crawl around and things like that, they would repeatedly put on an LP record for him of nursery rhymes and things like that, and he really loved just hearing Mary Had a Little Lamb. And it was on this one particular record, and it was always hidden and put back in amongst a whole stack of records. And he will crawl up to it, run his finger down the records, and always pull out, no matter where it was, pull out the record. And you've seen what it's like when you've got a stack of records. They're really thin to kind of read the titles on them. You usually have to pull out and look at the cover. But his parents were fascinated by it. They kept on taking the record and testing him and putting it back in different places, and he would still run his finger down, select it, and pull it out first time. They checked everything. Is it a different texture to the other records? No. So that was unusual for them. Later on, when he was walking, talking, they had a few things where he was ending up with what could be perceived as a sort of psychometry ability. He'd touch things and then have distinct visions and information about those things. A family friend came over one day, a friend of his father's, and Alex was told to come and meet this gentleman. He's a guest in our house, shake the man's hand, and has this kind of feeling and just says, "Sir, are you prepared to die?" And his father went, whoa, Alex, no. You can't say those things to people, okay? I know, they might come to you, well, Dad, that's just what happened. Yeah, fine, but if you do have it, tell me later. Don't just blurt them out or say to these people. The man just laughed it off. Next day, he did die of a heart attack. These kinds of things happen quite a lot. There's a pamphlet over there. I brought a couple of copies. It was more so Alex's first publication of just outlining these experiences that he had, premonitions and different things. Later on, he got loads of people that when he became famous for this, they would write to him and say, I want to know about this or that. There was one specific instance I remember with a lady who said, will my son come back from military service safely? And he said, yeah, absolutely. He's not going to get injured in warfare. He's not going to get killed. He will come home safely. But when he does come home, at least for the first couple of weeks, please, please don't let him drive over any railway crossings. Don't. In fact, probably just best he doesn't drive at all. The son came back. He was indeed fine and well. I think within a few days, she wasn't keeping an eye on him to that extent. He did need to go out. He did drive. And he went over a railway crossing, got hit by a train, killed straight away. So those sort of things happened. Other things they've been promoted, and I really need to go back into some of the records to see to what extent. And I think this one is really reported in this way rather than outright saying the name of the person. When Alex Tanous was being tested, I think it's on the next slide, at the American Society for Psychical Research, and Liz is familiar with this chap as well, Carlos Osis, who was one of their lead researchers there. Outside that window, the window that you can see behind Carlos Osis over there, this is in New York City. Outside that window is the Dakota Building. Is anyone familiar with that? Who was there? John Lennon. Alex, 2 weeks before John Lennon was shot there, he'd been standing at that window for some time and just watching the world go by. And I think it was only a few days later he was on the radio talking about his abilities and research that they were doing there. And they said, well, can you give us a premonition now, some sort of vision of the future, something that's really important that will resonate with a lot of people? And he said, well, yeah, I've been thinking about this for a while. I believe that very soon, within a few days' time, someone is going to get killed and it will change the consciousness of the world. A lot of people then instantly said he's predicted the death of John Lennon. Certainly for Alex, he was confident that that's what it was and that's what it meant to him because he'd spent so much time a few days beforehand staring at the Dakota Building. Being skeptical about it, you could ask, how many people are waiting for John there? How long is it going to be until someone just does something that you don't expect? Is he really kind of weighing these instances up? But that was considered quite remarkable for him. Still sticking to his childhood, though, he was doing all sorts of things, and not just the premonitions, but one thing that he did, and I always ask my students if they do this as well. When I was a kid, I used to go up the stairs in my parents' house and put loads of pillows and quilts at the bottom of the stairs, and I'd go up the stairs and I would jump down and see how high I could get while you could still safely land. If you're going to start hurting your legs or your ankles when you jump, then don't go that high again. But he was can people relate to that? Yeah, good. I'm not weird. So he was doing it as well. And he was in that state of flow, elation. He was having so much fun, time was flying by, and he was laughing to himself, and he jumps down and he looks back up the stairs, and he sees himself stood at the top of the stairs looking back down at himself. But he also realized that he could see himself from that upstairs perspective as well. What he believed this to be was his out-of-body state, but he had a lot of conscious control of it, and it also acted quite independently as well in terms of his opinion of that. So with that was one ability that he discovered that day, and he could continue on through the rest of his life. He'd also, as a kid, been out doing a paper round. I'll talk about the out-of-body experiences here. Been out doing a paper round with his brother, trying to get as many papers gone as he could. And all of a sudden, he just said to his brother, we need to go home now. He said, what, we nearly finished delivering the papers. No, we need to go home now. Something's happened to Dad. We need to go home now. And so his brother thought that this was very strange. They'd delivered papers loads of times. He'd never really had these premonitions then. They went home and discovered that their dad had been placing bamboo canes in the garden to grow runner beans. And one of the bamboo canes that he pushed into the ground snapped, and he lost his footing, and it went through his eye. It didn't kill him, but it led to infections and things that sometime later led to his death. And so that was the feeling that Alex had got. I know that was quite nasty. I should have prepared you for that. At least there's no pictures of that. School got him into trouble loads of times. He would blurt out the answer to things before the teacher had finished putting an equation on the board. And so he got into a lot of trouble. He already knew the answer ahead of time. He said that he couldn't read, not in the literal sense, but that it just didn't sink in with him. So what he did for exams was he'd take a book and place it under his pillow, and he'd sleep on it. And the next day, he would just get straight A's. He said that he was consistent in getting straight A's. He just somehow absorbed information. He didn't need to read it. He just needed to be around it and get that feeling. So that served him well. He served a time in military service. He wrote songs. He was quite successful with some. You'll find them on the Alex Tanous Foundation website, which ones he specifically published and got success with. He'd also been... his parents wanted him to be a priest, and he considered that initially, but his undergraduate degree was in government and politics. And when he'd gone through initial schooling, there were a lot of nuns and priests that were teaching him that didn't like the fact that he was talking about psychic abilities and coming out with these intuitions and things like that, until the doctrine of conscious came in, and it allowed you to, within theological studies, talk about anything so long as you could ground it back within biblical texts. It didn't matter if you started then straight off and talk about parapsychology. If you go into any biblical text anyway, you will find a lot of relationships to parapsychological phenomena, the resurrection of Christ and things like that. You can see how that resonates with survival type experiences. So you've got these kind of very early human documentations of parapsychological phenomena. After he'd done military service, he decided to go back into education. He ended up with a master's degree in philosophy from Boston College. He ended up with a theology master's from Fordham University. He then started to do a PhD and transferred to do a divinity doctorate instead. So again, more so focused on biblical texts, and gained that. And then later on, he got a master's degree in counselling and education from the University of Southern Maine. So 5 degrees in total. He's a really well-educated guy, gained his doctorate. And other things were occurring as well. He believed that not only did he have these premonitions, that he could project light from his eyes and specific pictures as well. So if I went up to that wall and I was Alex, I could say, look, and I'd be projecting the light and you could tell me exactly what's being projected on there. These were tested at the American Society for Psychical Research and the Maimonides Medical Center as well. There's only a few scattered reports around. Maimonides, when it packed up, a lot of the original reports, they were mainly testing dream telepathy there. But if there's anything on Alex, it's long since gone, any of the notes. So I'm really quite skeptical of anything to do with light coming out of people's eyes, because a lot of these reports are coming from Alex himself about other people's witnessing of these experiences. But they're all written up in his book, Beyond Coincidence. So there are many things that might spring to my mind regarding his interaction with hauntings and things like that. He was the very first person on scene to Amityville when the Lutz family claimed that they'd had all this phenomena going on there. And he and Carlos Osis, they were doing many, many investigations of hauntings, which Alex argued is what they based Ghostbusters on. Dan Aykroyd, and indeed Dan Aykroyd's father was a member of the American Society for Psychical Research. So when Dan Aykroyd was writing Ghostbusters with Harold Ramis, they'd actually gone to the ASPR, this building, to go through the library and look at the actual research on ghosts and hauntings. So when you watch Ghostbusters, even though you've got these comical ghosts and slime and things like that, there's a lot of terminology that actually resonates and is true of parapsychology, especially at the start, which I love showing my students when you've got Dr. Peter Venkman doing a Xenocard test, and he's clearly flirting with the student and wants her to do well, and he's saying, oh, you're brilliant, you're incredible, 10 out of 10, fantastic. And the other student, he's not getting anything, and if you get it wrong, you get an electric shock to try and make you better, and he's dropping his chewing gum out of his mouth every time he's being shocked. Eventually, he does get something right, and he still shocks him anyway. He just wants to get rid of him and stay with the girl. But it's great to see these overlaps, and Alex argued that, it's some of the investigations we did that they kind of replicated in the script. But they were the first on scene at Amityville, also a guy called Dr. Jerry Solvin from the Psychical Research Foundation as well. He joined them. They went to interview the Lutz family, who were living further up the road, and they kind of did it in pairs. So one would interview, and Alex and, not pairs really, because there's 3 of them, but one would go off to interview the Lutz family, and they went in the building, and then vice versa. Alex didn't feel anything in the house. He said that he would be psychically intuitive towards haunted locations and could tell you things, but he said nothing. I don't believe anything has ever been experienced in this house whatsoever. It's just flat. And then he went to interview the family. Carlos was talking to the family, and Alex had a wander around their house and looked in the kitchen, and he got more than a glimpse of a contract that talked about how the family were more or less legally obliged to continue this idea of this haunting going on within Amityville to keep the book rights and the film rights going and this story going on longer. For parapsychology to endorse that would have been really bad, so they just quickly made a dash exit. They started going through the back of the house to escape and go back to the ASPR and report on what was not happening and make it very clear that Amityville was not haunted and nothing had been happening or seemingly ever happened. And as they were going out the back door, Ed and Lorraine Warren were just coming in through the front door with about 10 journalists and photographers and things like that. So it was a good job they got out of there. I think Ed and Lorraine Warren later on radio had tried to kind of incorporate themselves with Alex and say that they'd been to investigate it with him. They made claims that Alex had levitated throughout the house and seen the devil in there. One of Alex's friends and followers had said, have you heard this radio show that made out that you can levitate and you've seen the devil? So he had to get his solicitors involved, his lawyers, and say, please retract that statement, make it very clear that I've not worked with the Warrens, I've never seen the devil, and I can't levitate. So all kinds of wild claims came out there. But the thing that led to this was indeed survival. Alex had had all these experiences. He believed even that he'd had childhood imaginary friends. that turned out to be deceased family friends that he'd never met. They died before he was even born, but when he talked about these imaginary friends, they made sense to his family. When he grew up and he'd gone through this military service and started to get back into education, he wanted to know, well, what is life after death all about? What can I learn? And so he volunteered in a local hospital and went to the end of life care unit and worked there for a period of time to see if being around people that are terminally ill, people that are dying, will it tell me anything? It didn't. It didn't tell him anything at all. He said he didn't learn anything from it. But at the time he was doing that, Carlos Osis and Alenda Haraldson were just starting to collect data, surveys from physicians and nurses about their experiences of end-of-life care. It happens within nursing homes and in hospitals, people reporting seeing dark shadows behind the next person who is about to die, or some of the phenomena that I mentioned around the deathbed, feeling a breeze or something else in the room. And they hooked up together. They said, you know, what's your interest, what's my interest? And they discovered they got this common ground. And Alex talked about these childhood experiences of premonitions, the light projection phenomena, and also this ability to go out of body at will. For Carlos, interested in life after death, he said, well, this is a perfect opportunity. If you claim you can do this at will, then maybe we can test it. There are a few spontaneous instances of it. There are two very distinct ones as well. I mentioned one of them in conversations with ghosts. Alex was here at the American Society for Psychical Research, staying in the guest quarters one night, dreaming about going to visit a friend in Canada. That friend in Canada did awake one night, and it woke his wife as well to the sound of a doorbell ringing. He goes downstairs, says, don't worry, I'll go and answer it. They'd only just gone to bed, and he opens the door and finds Alex is there. Alex says, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. You know, I was just in the neighborhood, I thought I'd just check how you're doing. We'll catch up some other time. Don't be silly, Alex, come in. They sat down, prepared some tea. They sat down and had a cup of tea together. They just chatted about a few things, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and he said, look, I'll leave you to it. We'll organize something. We'll get together and have a proper catch-up. No problem. Takes Alex to the door, sees him out, but he waits to listen for the sound of his car driving off because it's snowing heavily, wants to make sure he gets off fine, there's no car trouble. Waits for a moment. His wife has been hearing most of the conversation. She hasn't come down, but there's no sound of a car. And so he opens the door to look and check. There is no car. There's no sign of Alex. There's also no footprints in the snow leading up or away from the door of anyone. So that was unusual for him. He thought, well, you know, I know what Alex is like. He'd love an experience like this because it seems weird. We've just sat and had a cup of tea, but there's no evidence of him turning up or going. So he wrote a letter, knew he was at the ASPR at the time, and Alex, when he woke, wrote about this experience of his dream, gave it to Carlos Osis, and Osis got the letter from this gentleman as well and got them both to sign affidavits as well to say these are the true events that happened. One dreamt of the event, the other one experienced the event. Alex is physically in New York City, but is experienced elsewhere as an apparition in Canada and seemingly physically interacting with a cup as well that has liquid in it, which I find most remarkable. I mean, these are the signed affidavit accounts. There's another one where he went to visit a friend and they opened the door and the dog was uncharacteristically barking at Alex. And the guy says, I'll just put the dog away, moves the dog back to the kitchen, shuts it in the door, and Alex isn't there anymore. So no physical interaction in that sense, but still an apparition at the door. The guy's gone to answer it. So it happened on at least two occasions. Carlos Osis wanted to take this forward. He said, right, you can do it at will. It all stems from that jumping up and down the stairs thing. And you can see footage of this on YouTube if you type in Alex Tanous. But what was going on essentially over there, we have an optical illusion device. It's about half the size of this table and no higher than that. And it's a box that has a spinning wheel in it. And there is a lens just here. So if you were to see into it, you have to crouch down and look through the lens to actually see what's going on. And you can have 4 quadrants, upper left, upper right, lower right. There were 5 possible symbols which Alex had designed and had them within Egyptian mythology and things like that and ancient history. So he got the key of life, which was termed the cross. There was a feather. There was Anubis, which was just termed man, and a few other things like that. And I think either 4 or 5 possible colours. So there you can see blue and red, black would be one, and I think green was the other. And once it spun, it would settle on a quadrant, it would settle on a symbol, on a colour. So it would just show in one of the quadrants a colour and a symbol, and he had to state what quadrant is it, what colour is it, what symbol is it. So he's in a perception lab, laid down. He's got these sensors on that are looking at his brainwave activity. They're looking at his heart rate. Donna McCormick was later the research assistant. I've forgotten this lady's name, but these studies went on for 20 years, and Carlos Osis has got an intercom system and says, right, we're on trial 1, the target's ready for you now. And it would spin round and then randomly select what it was going to be. They tried this out, first of all, with participants off the street of New York City. So they came in, no one could get anywhere near statistical significance of guessing any of these right. What they also had in the room, with this idea that your mind is coming out of the body and traveling 4 rooms away, was looking for physical deformations within the room as well. So they had a strain gauge in there as well. At periods when Alex got several things right in a row over several trials, the strain gauge would start to show activity. He also got overall, in especially the study that was published in 1980, statistical significance as well. No one got that was a general participant. No one got strain gauge activity either. I think more of these studies need unearthing. A lot of them are in the American Society for Psychical Research, and there's a lot of unpublished stuff that the Alex Tanous Foundation have as well. But it's interesting to kind of see this setup because it's the closest you can get to really testing the idea of survival of death in the laboratory. You know, is your mind capable of acting outside of the body? Because you're claiming here that it's going several rooms away. So if that applies, how much can we argue for it just being independent without the body there at all, so after death as well? This study was published and there were 2 criticisms. I think it was Julian Isaacs was one of them and said you don't know how to use strain gauges, and Carlos Osis replied and said we use them all the time, this is how we use them. They seemed to be happy with that reply because no further argument was made. And then the other one was Susan Blackmore saying, your statistics are wrong. If you're taking every time you've got a quadrant, a colour, a symbol correct, then the chance is over 50% that you'll get that. It's really high. That's not statistically significant at all. And they said, Sue, you've read the paper wrong. What's actually going on is we're adding up every instance. Every time Alex got 1 right, every time he got 2 right, and every time he got all 3 right as well. There was no comeback to that, but I did notice Sue kind of pitched that argument a few times afterwards, which I think was a little naughty, but I'd love to speak to her a bit more about her actual thoughts on that. But that's where it kind of ended, really. Alex had had this long-time career in parapsychology. He'd been teaching at the University of Southern Maine. He'd done this light projection stuff. He'd done 20 years of this out-of-body experience research. He'd investigated hauntings. He'd lectured worldwide on his experiences. So many people got to meet and engage with him. He'd done positive psychology lectures in Japan. He was just all over the place, really. And he was traveling and meeting people more often than he was writing. And he got so busy with his writing, most of his books and other things are co-authored. So one of his last books that was published some 3 months after he passed away, this was 1990, Dream Symbols and Psychic Power. A lot of people buy this as a bedside book because it's full of dream interpretation. People pick it up and say, oh, I've had a strange dream about horses. What does that mean? And it's based on Alex having all those numbers of students talking about their dreams and looking at, well, what is the most common thing going on in your day-to-day life when you are dreaming about something like that to try and find any possible links. So that was written with Timothy Gray. Is Your Child Psychic? That came out with Catherine Fair Donnelly, and it talks about these childhood imaginary friends as well. That's been a really popular book because that's been published several times over. So you'll find more modern editions of that. And Beyond Coincidence outlines all of his own personal accounts of this growing up, the childhood that I mentioned, his education, the studies. But I think there's loads more to be said. The Alex Tanous Foundation about 10 years ago hired a couple of people, one of them an academic, another one a local researcher, to go out and interview as many people as possible that had met Alex Tanous to build a bigger picture up. So I think beyond doing the stuff with Scott Rogo and building a bigger biography, I will eventually get round to talking more about Alex Tanous and doing a full biography of him as well, way beyond this autobiography. But that was it. I mean, he was a man that was considered that even though he had these great predictions and could predict even some people's deaths, he couldn't predict his own. In the 1970s, he'd had a cancer scare. They said they found a tumor or something, and he was going for regular checkups with it. And I think he'd been passing blood as well, and he thought that was it, my number's up. And I think he'd been practicing some self-healing, and he went back to the doctors one day, and they were just dumbstruck. There was no evidence of the tumor being there at all, and he seemed absolutely fine, and that was it. In the late 80s, though, around about 89, I think he discovered that he got cancer again. And so his family say, like Alice, who's one of his nieces, she feels that he felt that that was it, his time was up, and he wasn't really fighting as much as he was towards the end. But he decided that in 1990 it was important that all of the writings that he got, they became part of a foundation. His name lived on, and they could support students to look into parapsychology and also go through his archives. So that's what I've been doing. There must be at least 5 unpublished books in total that he just never got around to finishing. He only saw 2 in his lifetime, as that one came out just after he died. So one was Conversations with Ghosts that never became a book. More recently is... well, I'll mention that in a sec, but I'll mention the more recent one. There's another one on the Bermuda Triangle and research that he went out to do on that, because he also believed there was a strange mystical triangle within Maine called the Maine Triangle, where people within that location had unusual experiences. Bermuda Triangle, if you're not familiar with that, people claimed that planes and ships and other things like that had spontaneously gone missing, and people have put all these kinds of very weird ideas as to what had happened, whether it was whirlpools or aliens that had taken them away. So he'd done some independent research on that. And there's even extended interviews with him as well that are more or less the size of a book. So there's a lot of material yet to come out on his personal thoughts and his abilities. I've no idea why the letters have done that on the side, but Alex was involved in health studies as well. He was interested in healthcare and had done demonstrations of his own healing. But he said, from the first, I adopt a policy to which I continue to hold. I believe in medicine. I believe that people who are sick should seek doctors. He never said, if alternative therapy is available, don't just go for that. Stick with Western medicine, stick with modern medical research, and if you want alternative therapy as well, fantastic, do it. Don't surrender the modern medicine. We heal in the personal, the social, the planetary world. He noted that medical science recognized by the 1980s that illness can be created by you. It is the mind that creates it. He was also showing these links between heavy stress was found in those who developed heavy cancer, thus links between stress and cancer were established. And we've also seen how much of a kind of a self-impact we can have on that. We're influenced by the placebo effect. You take a sugar pill that you don't know is a sugar pill, and you get better because you know you've taken an actual substance and you want to heal and you get better. That can be anything from drinks to creams and all sorts as well. It works really well with children when you've got a child and it's struggling to sleep, and you just go and get them a glass of water and you say, just have a sip of this, it's special sleeping water. I've just got it from the kitchen. And they go, all right, and they take it and then they go to sleep straight away thinking you've put something extra in it as well. So the placebo effect works really well in that sense. You also have the nocebo effect as well, because when you do those kinds of trials with drugs, you have to tell people of the potential side effects that it can cause, even when you are including the placebo in it as well. And I think some recent studies that were gathered together of various studies showed that around 45% of the negative effects can be taken on by people that have taken the sugar pill. So even though they know that it's got these side effects like, I don't know, constipation, hair loss, things like that, they start to develop it because they know it's a potential side effect of the actual drug that they think they might have taken when in fact they've just taken the sugar pill. So we've seen how powerful this mind over body influence actually is. With Alex, his healing ability was more or less what people have related to Jesus Christ as well, this influence of such a big figure and people touching Jesus's gown and believing they've been healed. People that just shook Alex's hand believed they felt this intense energy go through his hand and that they got better. But again, you can see it mixed in with modern medicine. I showed this to my positive psychology students once, and there was just one student who had a Christian upbringing who was very upset by the whole notion of it, but the rest of the students then started arguing with her and saying, you're not getting the bigger context. And the context was this lady was going through chemotherapy for cancer. She knew about Alex and his alleged abilities to heal, shakes his hand, feels great, feels the touch, knows all these rumours and accounts about him. And next time she goes to the doctors, she said, could you heal me? And he said, I have healed you. You're better now. Go to the doctors and you'll find out. Her next checkup was only like 4 or 5 days away. She goes on the Saturday and the doctor says, brilliant, cancer's gone. We didn't think it would, but it has. And she attributes it to Alex. But what I said to the students was, think of it in the wider context. She's going through chemotherapy. She wants to get better, and then along the way, Alex turns up, the opportunity to meet him, and there's the extra alternative therapy, just meeting someone that has these alleged abilities to heal. Placebo takes over and positive thinking. But he wanted to look at actual practical healing as well. How could he use his own alleged ESP abilities as well to help other people? He'd done some hands-on healing as well, not in the sense of, I don't remember that famous guy who had the earpiece who was discovered for doing that, and it was terrible when he went into the audience and he'd say, "Oh, you can't walk? Well, stand up for me." And he was making them do a few steps and then hitting them on the head and saying, "I heal you," and things like that. That stuff was debunked so terribly. I mean, well, it needed to be debunked, but Alex was doing it in a different way. He was talking about modern medicine. He was talking about his experiences. And it wasn't this harsh pushing people or kind of forcing them to walk. It was more so hugs and touches or just holding hands, things like that, and just having a meditative moment with the person. What I discovered in the archives was this book, Paranormal Psychotherapy, Conventional and Non-Conventional Healing of Mental Illness. And I was really surprised looking at the breakdown. I'd never heard of Elaine Swinge. I'd never heard of Andrew F. Bambrick either. And I read through the manuscript. I tried my best to kind of track down some of the previous authors. I mean, they've all since passed on. And I proposed this to the Alex Tanous Foundation, that this was the next project that I looked into, because we so heavily endorse clinical parapsychology at Northampton, and we also have a really good body of psychotherapists and counsellors as well, and I thought this would be a brilliant manuscript. What was involved in there was Alex gave some few examples of healing broken bones and healing cancer as just an example of his own healing ability. But then Elaine Swinge had been to those kinds of events where you just saw those photos, and she said, "Well, this is great. This is the only photo I could find of her, but I think she was a lot younger when she was working with Alex in the early 80s. And she said, "Well, this is great. If you believe you've got this ability, and I've seen it, I'm quite impressed. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a psychiatrist by profession, but I'm holding psychotherapy sessions. I would like you to come in and psychically diagnose the patient, only if they're A, willing to do so, and then B, what you actually say is accurate, and they say, yes, it is, on those two conditions. If either of those are wrong, then you're not involved in the session." And so first and foremost, they'd say, "Do you agree? Are you open to a psychic being involved in your psychotherapy session?" Yes. And then he would start off by going through his whole, right, and going back to your childhood, this and this and this happened. There was one particular instance, just remembering off the top of my head, that there was a lady that had gone to them with kind of self-confidence issues and other things, and she got an eating disorder, and she was overweight. She had got excessive weight, and one of the reasons for that she couldn't lose weight, and she was comfort eating as well whenever she was stressed or depressed. Alex said, "Okay, the reason for that is, and you feel so badly about it, I'm going back to your childhood, and you're riding a bike round the block, and something's happened, you've lost your balance, you've hit something, and you've fallen off, and you've hurt yourself really badly, and then you've gone to your mum, who I think was constantly getting on to you about not eating enough. And instead of giving you sympathy, instead of hugging you or kissing you and treating your wound, her first and main comments are, if you had more padding, you wouldn't have hurt yourself." Talking about being, putting on more weight, actually eating more. And this stuck with her unconsciously and led to later on this comfort eating every time she was hurt emotionally or physically. And her mum's kind of comments saying, you will actually suffer less pain if you actually keep on eating. And so she was impressed that Alex actually was that accurate about knowing about this childhood instance and her mother. So that's just one example. There were other people that got other things. He went back, and only if those were successful would they continue with the treatment. So the book essentially outlines 5 different case studies of people working with Alex Tanous, just a few that they thought were 5 really distinct instances to demonstrate. And now and then Andrew F. Bambrick would sit in as an independent psychotherapist to see if what was going on was a very fair assessment as well, starting with Alex, working through to Elaine, and then following up with that person to see how well this course of therapy was helping them, and also administering medication as well for some of their psychological disorders, especially in cases of depression as well. So that's really the main story of Alex Tanous, unless I put anything else in there. I don't remember including that conclusion. What have we put? Counsellors, medical professionals and healthcare workers are steadily becoming more aware of parapsychological phenomena and the impact that it has on patients. So that also relates back to the after-death communications as well. Therapeutic techniques based upon the willing beliefs of the patients can be helpful. They can integrate with conventional therapy as well. He wasn't asking anyone to surrender that. Allowing both the Eastern and the Western forms of healthcare to complement each other not only helps an individual to heal, but in a manner that suits them as well. That they're not being forced into anything, they're doing what they want to do. But it can positively contribute to their well-being. we've got this emergence here of practical parapsychology in health and well-being as well. We talk about these experiences and evidencing ESP, evidencing survival. Well, if people are having these experiences as well, especially a medium or a psychic like Alex who's claiming these abilities, how can we put it to good use and incorporate it into modern medicine and alternative therapy that people are comfortable with, especially if we can monitor it and see, well, is it having a negative effect or positive effect? If it's having a positive effect, we don't care so much about the mechanisms, we care about the impact that it has on people. Because we have the placebo effect and many other things, and a lot of medical practitioners will just say, that's just placebo, regardless of us knowing about the mechanisms, because we really don't. It's the mind's power over matter. And so such research in this area branches out and contributes to the literature of parapsychology, positive psychology, counselling practice, medical research, and so much more. There are so many interlinking disciplines that are interested in all these kinds of outreaches. So that was Alex Tanous. I mean, again, I was surprised that in the UK not so many people knew about him. I suppose his kind of main rise of fame was from the 1970s to 1990 when he passed away. So he'd accomplished so many things in terms of talking about these abilities, going and doing worldwide lectures, volunteering himself constantly as a subject for the out-of-body experiences. And I just feel that he needs more and more recognition. That text of science psychotherapy is so controversial even to this day, but I had loads of endorsements from clinical psychologists and psychotherapists to get their opinion who've mentioned it on the cover and inside. And we just felt that this can't come out as it is, it needs an explanation. So Professor Stanley Krippner and myself wrote the foreword after I'd edited it, and we both commented on some things. And then Professor Adrian Parker, who's a clinical psychologist from the University of Gothenburg, he's written the afterword as well to really sandwich the whole book in, saying, where are we now? What does this book actually mean? How does it contribute anything to modern day? Because it was a text that was finished in 1985. And I've never heard of any instance like this of a psychic working so closely in the psychotherapy setting with patients to try and help them, and showing some really positive outcomes. So that's a summary of Alex Tanous and what he did, and that's out on Amazon or over there. I thought I'd give an explanation of that. You may see that over there, and it's not got my name on it. So this is Uncle Rowley. This is Professor Roland Rotherham. He's an Arthurian folklorist. I'll be seeing him next month down in Tintagel, where allegedly King Arthur's castle was. He holds a knight's dinner in King Arthur's halls, where it all goes to a children's charity and stuff like that attending. But he knights people that are members of this fellowship. I am a knight. I am Sir Callum Cooper down in Cornwall in this specific town. But he'd been working closely with John Mason. They've been going around photographing castles of Britain and Ireland, and he asked me to write the foreword for it. So my name's not on the cover, but I wrote the foreword to Haunted Castles. And I think they're doing a lot more work on this as well soon. But that was the summary of Alex Tanous. Told you it was a shorter talk than the last one, mainly pictures, but I just wanted to kind of let you know about him a little bit more as well. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll welcome questions.